You ever stop and think about how your jaw actually moves? I mean, really think about it. For decades, this science seemed pretty settled. But what if the experts were, well, just plain wrong? This is the story of a scientific hunt. A story about a team of researchers who decided to challenge a core idea and ended up discovering the jaw's true center of motion.
So, it all kicks off with a really simple question. We open and close our mouths all day long, and it feels kind of like a simple hinge, doesn't it? Well, back in the 1960s, a group of researchers in Tokyo started thinking that the established theory, which pretty much treated it that way, was missing a huge piece of the puzzle. So, they decided it was time to put it to the test.
And that really set the stage for a classic scientific showdown. You had the old, established theory on one side and a brand new, radical question on the other. Let's see what happens when these two ideas finally collide.
So in one corner, you've got the dominant theory coming out of the United States, known as Gnathology. It's basically the study of the whole chewing system, and it was built on two core ideas, a theoretical hinge axis for movement and a starting point called centric relation. But in the other corner, a new way of thinking was bubbling up in Tokyo. They were proposing a more natural starting point they called the stable condylar position and a revolutionary new idea for the center of movement, the kinematic axis.
And listen, this wasn't just some abstract debate happening in a journal, It was driven by a really dedicated team, led by Professor Ishihara at the former Tokyo Medical and Dental University. Two key researchers, Oshi and his junior colleague Kono, were about to publish work that would challenge decades of accepted science. They were going to rewrite the book on how we chew, talk, and move our jaws. Okay, so before they could even think about finding this true axis of rotation, the Tokyo team had to solve an even more basic problem. Where does the jaw's movement actually begin? What's the real starting point? And this is where Oishi made a huge breakthrough. See, up until then, most of this kind of research was done on specimens preserved in formalin. The problem is, formalin makes tissue rigid and totally unnatural. Oishi realized this was a massive flaw. If you want to see how the jaw truly moves, you need to study it in a state that's as close to life as possible. So he used fresh specimens. And that one decision, it changed everything.
By looking at these fresh specimens, Oshishi found something, well, kind of profound. The head of the jawbone, that part we call the condyle, it didn't need to be forced into some special position. It just settled. It found its own comfortable, stable spot in the socket. This was a position of effortless natural function. And he gave it a name, the stable condylar position, or SCP.
And this really gets to the core philosophical difference here. Gnathology's centric relation was an artificial position. You had to literally push the jaw back as far as it could go. But Oishi's stable condylar position was a natural, functional resting spot, and it was incredibly precise, with only about 0.2 to 0.3 millimeters of wiggle room. It wasn't some theoretical extreme. It was the jaw's true functional home base. All right, so they've found the jaw's true starting point. But that just opened up an even bigger mystery. What is the actual center of rotation for every single movement the jaw can make?
Professor Ishihara was absolutely driven by this one powerful idea. He just didn't buy that the existing hinge axis, which by the way only worked for one tiny specific opening motion, was the whole story. He had this gut feeling that nature had to be more elegant than that. There had to be a single true axis that governed everything, from a massive yawn to chewing side to side.
Now, to find this thing, you can't just guess, you need data. So they built this incredibly clever custom rig. They used strobe photography to capture movement like a flipbook in tiny slices of time. They made a special splint with two little white markers on it for the lower jaw, and then used a Facebook to map the exact location of the condyle. And they did all of this in a pitch-black room to get perfectly clear photos of the jaw in motion.
So getting all those pictures was just the first part. The real heavy lifting was still to come. Now they had to dig through thousands of data points to find a hidden pattern. The hunt was now purely mathematical.
Okay, think about it like this. When a wheel rolls down the street, it's doing two things at once, right? It's moving forward, that's translation, and it's spinning, that's rotation. But the axle right in the middle, it only moves forward. It doesn't spin at all. The researchers faced the exact same problem. They needed to find the axle of the jaw, a point on the condyle that only slid without rotating, because by definition, that point would have to be the true center of rotation for everything else. Their method was just brilliant. So first they tracked those two external markers through every jaw movement you can imagine. Then they basically created a virtual grid of over 120 test points all over the condyle. Using the data from the outside markers, they could then calculate the exact path that each one of those 120 points would take. And the last step was the hunt. They compared all of those calculated paths, looking for that one special point whose path wasn't some crazy loop, but just a simple, pure sliding motion.
So after all that painstaking work, the fresh specimens, the custom camera rig, the pages and pages of calculations, the moment of truth finally arrived.
And when they plotted all that data, boom, there it was, right on the graphs. Just like they thought, most of the test points traced out these wild, chaotic, looping paths. But the paths from one very specific region of the condyle, they all collapsed. They all converged into a single, beautiful, elegant curve. This was it. They'd found it.
And get this, the precision was just mind-blowing. This path wasn't some vague area. It was an incredibly narrow band, measuring just 0.7 millimeters wide on average. It didn't matter what the jaw was doing, opening, closing, moving sideways. The true center of rotation always traveled along this incredibly specific track.
And they gave this amazing discovery a name, the kinematic axis. This is that specific point on the condyle that is the true center of rotation for all jaw movements. So unlike a simple hinge that just pivots in one spot, the kinematic axis actually moves. It slides predictably right along that 0.7 millimeter curve, and it governs every single complex motion your jaw makes. So here's the core problem, right? Well, the answer is this amazing concept called the kinematic axis. To get us there, here's our game plan. So here's our setup. We know the coordinates of 2 points, let's call them point A and point B. Our main goal is to find the coordinates of a third, totally unknown point, point C. And to do that, we have 2 absolutely crucial clues. First, we know the exact distance from B to C, we'll call that R. And second, we know the angle of C in relation to the direction from A to B, we'll call that theta. Believe it or not, that's everything we need.
First, we just calculate the length of the line between A and B. And second, we figure out its precise direction. See? Pretty straightforward. Now, what's really important here is how we define that direction. Instead of just using a single number for slope, we're going to break it down into 2 separate parts, a horizontal piece, u, and a vertical piece, v. This approach, using a vector, gives us a much more powerful and precise way to handle direction, and you'll see just how critical that is in our very next step.
So, we've got our baseline direction from A to B, but our target, point C, isn't on that line. This is where the magic happens. We need to perform a rotation. This is where our angle, theta, finally comes into play, letting us pivot our baseline and aim it exactly where we need to go.
Now, I know this might look a little intense, but don't worry about it. These are just the standard formulas for rotation in trigonometry. Think of them like a machine. You feed in your original direction components, u and v, and you pop in the angle, theta. The machine cranks for a second and then spits out a brand new set of direction components that are perfectly rotated for us. So, let's just recap what we did. We took our original direction vector, u, v. We ran it through those formulas using our angle theta, and that transformed it into a new vector, which we're calling u', v'. And the coolest part? This new vector points directly from B straight towards our final target, C. We now have the correct heading. Conceptually, the idea is incredibly simple. The location of our target, C, is just our starting point, B, plus the distance we need to travel in that new direction we just worked so hard to calculate. That's it. That's the core logic.
Now, let's just translate that simple idea into math. The x-coordinate of C is just the x-coordinate of B, plus our distance r, multiplied by our new horizontal direction, u'. And we do the exact same thing for the y-coordinate using v'. It's just simple addition and multiplication.
So, the next logical step is to just plug in the full rotation formula for u' that we saw a minute ago. See what we're doing? We're just substituting one piece of our puzzle into another, building up towards the complete picture. And finally, we replace the original u and v with what they actually are, the pieces that are based on points A and B. And there it is, the whole shebang, the complete, fully assembled formula. And because we built it together piece by piece, this equation that looked so daunting before now makes perfect sense. We actually did it.
And this is where it gets really cool. This is not just some abstract exercise from a math textbook. The exact formula we just built, step by step, is literally found in professional medical textbooks.
Doctors and biomechanical engineers use it to analyze the incredibly complex rotational movements of human joints, like your knee or your shoulder.
I mean, when you put them side by side, the difference is just, well, it's night and day. The old hinged axis, it only worked for a tiny little opening movement. The kinematic axis applies to all of them. The path of the old axis was sloppy and wide, more than 3 times wider in fact. But the kinematic axis follows that super precise 0.7 millimeter track. One was a temporary guess, the other was the true center of rotation.
This discovery wasn't just some minor correction in a textbook. It gave us a fundamentally new and honestly a much simpler way to understand one of the most complex joints in the entire human body.
What the Tokyo team ultimately gave us was this beautiful, elegant simplicity hidden inside all that complexity. They proved that any jaw movement, no matter how wild it seems, can be broken down into 2 simple things happening at the same time. That kinematic axis point sliding along its defined path, and the rest of the jaw rotating around that moving point. It's a gorgeous, unified theory of motion.
This story from over 50 years ago is just such a powerful reminder that science is never really settled. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What other big ideas that we all take for granted today are just waiting for the right person to ask the right question and find a deeper, more elegant truth hiding just beneath the surface?